everyone, to the William Jeanes Memorial Library. Especially thank you for coming to such an important program. Our first in a series of veteran speakers events that we're going to have here at the library. This evening we're going to ask some questions of Sergeant Wilcots and his time in the Marines. He's got quite a story to tell us. But before he begins, I'm going to introduce Joe McGrath, who is going to tell us a little bit about Sergeant Wilcots and the Veterans Memorial Project here at in White Marsh Township.
Yes, my name's Joe McGrath, and I'm here on behalf of the White Marsh Veterans Monument. And we're putting together a series of 4 speakers for veterans presentation. And for Black History Month, we have a very special speaker, a man who I've known for years now. And it's Sergeant Henry Wilcots. He was part of the Montford Point Marines. For those of you that aren't familiar with Montford Point, from 1942 to 1948, unfortunately, the Marine Corps was the last service to integrate. The Montford Pointers trained separately, and Sergeant Wilcots actually joined in, I think, 46.
46, right.
And he was one of the first African Americans to fight in the integrated Marine Corps in Korea. Amongst other things, which I never knew about this man, he's also a famous architect that worked with Louis Kahn. You can look that up. But I want to just tell you something, why these men are so special in my eyes. Another Montford Pointer, it was hard to serve in the Marine Corps. They're basically the Jackie Robinsons of the Marine Corps. And this man, Phil Herout, who passed away a year ago, he was in Miami, and he saw a Marine, and he went up and he said, "I want to be one of you guys." And the guy said, "We don't take your kind." That's really heartbreaking. This is the kind of discrimination these men faced. And another Marine was there and said, "Oh, no, we do." And it turned out Phil Herout was 15 when he said that, and he joined the Marine Corps when he was 16. This is a man who fought for our country, and he served in World War II, and he was part of the island, campaign. And Colonel Church told a story at one of our Marine Corps birthday balls that the Montford Pointers were just supposed to be pure support troops. Well, what happened was the Marines were getting pretty bloodied on one of the islands, and they said, "We need the Montford Pointers." And after some hesitation, the general said, "Bring them up." And as they come marching up, it was heard that they said, "Oh my God, they're Negroes." Well, after one day of combat, they said, "Thank God they're Marines." So, I mean, I'm proud to consider these men my brother Marines, and I'm truly humbled. And with that, I'll shut up and give you Sergeant Henry Wilcots.
Thanks, Joe. There's nothing else to say. I mean, he cleaned it all up for me. After I'd finished high school in 46 and decided to go into the Corps, actually the reason that I went in October at that particular time is that our lovely gentlemen of the Congress at the time couldn't make up their minds whether or not to extend the GI Bill. And I told my parents, "Look, if I go in, I can get the GI Bill, you can't afford college, and I can go to college. I can get out in 3 years, this is a snap. The shooting is over with, and this is the time to go in." So I did, with their blessing, I joined the Corps. And but the night I went in was October the 4th, and the GI Bill was going to expire October the 5th. So I went in and shipped out, and the next morning the newspaper read Congress had extended the GI Bill. So I was caught. you know. And by the time I reached Montford Point, the lovely people down there, it was at night, and the night duty folks were on, and so they said, "We know why you're here. You're here because guys like you are trying to get the GI Bill." He says, "You'll either become Marines or you will not get the GI Bill. In other words, if you don't make it, you're out of here." And there was a lot of other stuff going on at the time. And I'll tell you that my little ears had heard a lot of stuff, you know. I knew how to speak the alley speak. I knew how to talk that stuff. And in fact, my mom had, well, you guys won't know, you're too young, that there was a soap called Blue Barrel soap, which was a laundry soap. And I had my mouth and tongue scrubbed with that stuff a couple of times, you know, growing up. But anyway, I had never heard such language in my life. And there was a group of us standing there, you know, it was at night, and they were screaming at us. And you know, just these words were flying all through us, and guys were, you know, tears were running down their faces, and a couple of them, I think, had wetted trousers even. You know, and I said to myself, I says, you know, I got myself into this mess. I'm going to hang it out, and they'll not break me. So with that, that was my introduction into the Corps. Now, the Marines have two training stations, San Diego and in California, and Parris Island, South Carolina. 1942, when the Marines took black in, they had to create a camp. We couldn't go to California, we couldn't go to Parris Island. Nobody wanted us. So they created this thing in North Carolina, out of Jacksonville, on the New River. Now the post there had been an old CCC camp, and there's a couple of you in here I can see that know what CCC is, you know, Civilian Conservation Corps, created by President Roosevelt back in the 30s. And they had built little huts on this land on the New River, and that became the Marine base for the blacks. Montford Point it was called, Camp Montford Point. And the first men who entered the Corps back in 42, they had to actually clear the place, create this little place. There was these little huts on there that handled about 12 to 14 men. And they had to build their own barracks, their own parade ground, their own training facilities. Those were the first guys, the first 100 guys that went in. After that, then the government began to build more units, more camping facilities. The leadership of the camp at that time was an all-white leadership. Colonel Woods became the commanding officer of it, and all the NCOs were all white. And what the Corps had done, they had called in Marines who had served in places like Nicaragua and Haiti, and because they said these men would know how to deal with the coloreds. Well, you know how that went. But anyway, so it was all white staff until in 1943. By that time, enough Negroes had. I used black, Negroes, colored, because those terms were used then. The term African American came about, you know, in the 50s, 60s. But anyway, I just use it back and forth because that's where I grew up. I am considered a recruit by the guys who came in 42 to 43, 44. So they're all in their 90s, late 90s actually. We had a couple of guys here still in their hundreds that are still kicking around. And the chapter here, I'm scattered all over the place, but the chapter, the Montford Point Marines Association, we have maybe around 15 old Montford Pointers that belong to the chapter. And I'm considered, like I say, a recruit because I haven't reached 90 yet. So I'm 89. When I went into the Corps, they still had the same, I think the same mosquitoes were there that were there in 42. You know, they hadn't all been buried. The story goes that a DI would tell you, you know, why did you kill that mosquito? And you're going to have to bury it. So you dig a hole to bury this mosquito. And then you'd fill it up with the dirt. And then some other DI would come along and said, what's going on? And the first DI would say, oh, we buried a mosquito. And he would say, what was the ginger of that mosquito? I don't know. So you have to dig it up. So they would dig it up, find the mosquito, you know, to rebury it. Those are the kind of little things that took place around there, you know, just to harass you a bit. They've stopped some of that stuff, I understand, like, you know, walking into the swamp and whatnot. I don't think the Corps does that anymore because they've had a few fatalities about that. But anyway, to go along, the boot camp training was a messy thing, and after the end of the camp training, this was in 1946, you know, the Corps had no idea what to do with the Montford Pointers. The first Montford Pointers were returning from the Pacific, and some of them were being discharged. Some of them were, you know, signing up as regulars. But the Washington had no idea what to do. There was no stations in this country that wanted black Marines in their cities. So they couldn't do that. You know, they tried the San Francisco, they tried the shipyards up there, they tried even Hawaii and other stations. Connecticut they tried, but we were not welcome. Until late in 47, they began to find places that would accept the Marines. So I had hated that place down in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and would not even take leave or go into the city because it was such a hateful place. And the company street, there's a bulletin board there. And posted on that are various opportunities for Marines where you can be stationed, different jobs you could go to, different schools you could go to, and I signed up for every one of them. You know, I didn't care. They even had posted once there was they were looking for volunteers to go to Antarctica with the Navy. They were going to do an expedition down there. I signed my name to that. And the guys just laughed at me like crazy, you know. So what in the world are you going to do that for? But I had signed up to go to engineering school in Fort Belford. And never got a word about it. So in the Corps, they have what they call general mass. When a general comes on station, you can sign up to meet with him, to speak your mind, your gripes, whatever you want to do. And so the guys encouraged me to do that, so I did. I stood before the general and told him my story, that I had signed and qualified to go to engineering school and had not heard a word about it. And I wanted to know why not. So the general looked at me and he said, "Did you speak with the sergeant major on this?" I said, "No, sir." And the general looked at me again and he said, "About face." You know, conversation's over with. I learned a lesson. I had failed to go through the chain of command. And that has stayed with me. You know, don't shoot your head off too soon. Anyway, they had us doing different duties down there while we were being assigned or not assigned. And one of them was malaria control detail. Now that, what that encompassed, they would give you, you know, bolo knives and whatnot. And you would go clean the swamps at Camp Lejeune, where all the white Marines were. Blacks were not allowed on Camp Lejeune's site unless you were accompanied by a white Marine. So anyway, they formed this detail for the Montford Pointers to go to Camp Lejeune to clean up the swamps. And we regretted it and hated it. And finally, some of the staff NCOs got together and said, "Hey, we're not going to do this anymore." And that was ended. You know what I mean? Why should we go to Lejeune to clean up the white Marines' swamps? You know, so we stopped that. In 1948, a detachment was formed to go to Earl, New Jersey, which is just outside of Red Bank. And I became part of that detachment. It was a guard detachment. Earl had decided, New Jersey had decided that yes, we can accept the black Marines. So we replaced a guard detachment of all white Marines up at Earl. And that was really good duty. I mean, because we now quartered in brick barracks, 2-story, you know, no more stove fires to light, as we had to do down at Lejeune or Montford Point. And that was really good because Liberty was good, because you could go to Newark, you could go to New York. It was fine. In 1949, my enlistment was up. So they couldn't discharge me there at Earl. They sent me to Brooklyn Navy Yard. Brooklyn Navy Yard says, "We can't discharge you here. You'll have to go to Great Lakes, Illinois." So I said, "Okay, you know, I'll take a train ride out there. I mean, close to home now." Let me back up a minute, because like I said, the two depots for training, California or South Carolina, and the dividing line was the Mississippi River. So if you lived on the west side of the Mississippi River, you would go to San Diego. On the east side of the Mississippi, you went to South Carolina. And that still holds true for today, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, they sent me to the Great Lakes Naval Station up in Illinois, because that was on the other side of the Mississippi. So anyway, and that's where I was discharged. At the time of being discharged, I enlisted in the inactive reserve, because I was still a little queasy about it, going to school and exactly what I wanted to do. And I had been away from school for 3 years anyway. So I was discharged there, and like I said, I enlisted in the inactive reserve and went home to Des Moines, Iowa. And while there, you know, I just took up a couple of jobs, this, that, and the other. And lo and behold, 1950 rolls around. I'm on a fishing trip with my dad and uncle up in northern Iowa, and the radio is blasting away, and we hear that the North Koreans had decided to run south. And after that, I received an envelope from the Marine Corps. Welcome back. Now, the Corps at that time, you know, I was telling you, it was separated totally, all black units and all white units. So I meet with the sergeant down there in Des Moines, who was putting together the groups that was a reservist that was going to be trained again. And he called me on the phone and he says, come to the train station an hour early so we can talk. I arrived at the train station. He handed me the envelopes, my orders, and he says, you're to take these 6 Marines to Camp Pendleton. You're in charge. I looked around, there were 6 white Marines standing there. Now, you know, this was a no-no. But this guy was following the book. The book says the senior man with the most time and the rank is in charge. I knew then the Corps had changed. I knew then integration was taking place. Because prior to that, in 1948, President Truman had issued an Executive Order 9981, which called for the end of segregation in the armed services. So we were on our way to San Diego, or to Camp Pendleton, California, for advanced training prior to shipping out to Korea. The Corps in 1946 were shooting for a total of 100,000 men, or 10,000 men. 100,000 men. That's what they wanted. They were having a hard time with that, with Congress, because at the end of World War II, there were many in government and the military who says, we don't need a Marine Corps. What are these guys going to do? You know, reduce it down to embassy duty, the band, and things like that, and ceremonial duties. You know, keep them aboard ship, but we really don't need them anymore. And among those people saying that was Truman himself, who said the Corps had the greatest propaganda machine, greater than Russia. And that was his way of expressing it, his dislike for the Corps. General MacArthur, he didn't want the Corps anymore. We don't need them. So anyway, come 46 or 50, when the Koreans decided to go south, they needed Marines, needed them fast. The Corps had only less than 75,000 men. They needed to build, they had one division. They needed to build the Corps. But the Corps had the foresight at the end of World War II to band together reservists across this country. Every state, some cities had reserve units. And that's what they called on. They called the reservists back in. Those who were active and those who were inactive, like myself. And so when they started building up their division, and it was mostly made up of reservists. In Korea, when I was there, at the 7th Marines, it was made up about a third of reservists. It was a little over 35% reservists formed that regiment. Guys who had been active or inactive, and you know, that was the men that we were dealing with. So at Camp Pendleton, we went through advanced training, some winter training up in Bear Mountain in California, and I shipped out with the the 5th Replacement Contingent out of Camp Pendleton to go to Korea. Took about 5 or 6 days boat trip. We didn't fly in those days. You still had merchant ships to transport troops. And we disembarked at Kobe, Japan, got rid of our personal gear, reboarded, and sailed into Busan, which is now called Busan, Korea, which is the southern tip of the peninsula. Now, we've just finished the Olympics, the Winter Olympics. And those hills, those snow hills, if you look, if you watched it on TV, and if you look just beyond those slopes where they were skiing, you'll see some brown hills. That's my real estate. So I arrived in Korea, and I was assigned with the Able Company, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. Went up into the hills there. And my whole time was spent in what they call the East Central sector of Korea, so I never got to Seoul or any of the large cities or even villages. I spent all my time there online, other than when they placed us in reserve for regrouping and new clothes and cleaning your weapons, and then you would go right back. Reserve was awful, because in reserve, as you're a Marine, you know, it's harder than being online, because you're constantly training, constantly, you know, day and night. But anyway, that's where I spent my time there. And when it came time for me to be shipped back home, after a year there, I arrived there in January, February of '51, went through all of '51 there, and came back out in '52 of February. I was discharged in Camp Pendleton and returned to Des Moines in '52. Now the story changes. I'm going to go to school and pursue architecture, which I had always wanted to do. Now I just entered the school there, and I says, I don't know if I can deal with being in a classroom. I'd been away from school for 6 years, but I managed. I spent a year at Grandview College in Des Moines just to get myself ready, and then I transferred to the University of Colorado Boulder, where I studied architecture. They were all big on Frank Lloyd Wright in those days out there. And there were some guys who were in school, some of my students, you know, wanted to go to Taliesin to study with Wright. But anyway, I did, and I sort of got tired of him. And you know, and when I finished my studies at university, then I went back to Des Moines and was hired by a man named Amos Emery, an architect. And I did my internship with him for a year. Amos was a great guy. Yeah, I had walked into his office and I said, you know, I knew he was sort of the big man in Des Moines, an architect. And I walked into his office and asked the secretary if I could see him. What about? Well, I just wanted to talk with him. So he was there, and he invited me in, and we sat and chatted. And I asked him, how do I go about getting into an architect's office? He asked me questions about my training, what I'd been doing. And really, really funny, you know, I never had a resume until we had a, you know, job in Philadelphia. Our job is here, a government job. And so I just chatted with him. And he gave me a list of 6 names of architects in Des Moines. He says, you go in there and you talk to them. He says, and then you come back with some of your schoolwork and we'll talk. I said, okay. So I went around the city, met with these different architects, and they would all ask the same doggone question. Why didn't Amos hire you? And I told them I didn't go to Amos to look for a job. I went to Amos for advice. Well, by the week's end, Amos called me. And he said, start work on Monday. That's how I got in the door. So you youngsters that are finishing high school, don't be afraid of it. Somebody will take you on. Anyway, I was with Amos for a year, and Amos was a great guy, like I said. I would go in on Saturdays and mornings, and he would sit with me and work details. The art of detailing, he called it. And we would work. Amos had been a World War I pilot with the Army Air Force, and he was in France. And Amos smoked cigars, and he always had a cigar in his mouth. And he would sit at the board with you, and he would draw, and the ashes would fall on the linen, you know, a little spittle maybe here and there, and he would just brush it off. He would just keep talking and keep drawing. You know, that was my mentor, the best one I ever had. Anyway, after being with Amos for a year, then I went back to Denver. I had married, went to Denver and started working there, and worked with several architects, and then was there for about 6 years, and I received an opportunity to go to Pakistan. And so the wife and I decided, we sat down and talked about this, because we were ready to do something. We wanted to do something different, something exciting, and we weren't ready just to, you know, piddle around and settle down in Denver, though we enjoyed Denver. We enjoyed the hills. We enjoyed skiing. And that was one of my reasons for going out to Denver in Colorado, is because I still had good legs and could climb hills. But anyway, this offer came through to work with an architect in Karachi, Pakistan. And so we went out there for 2 years. And it was an enjoyable 2 years, working out there with different peoples. And Pakistan at that time, as you historians may know, had been created, and in 1947, the Great Partition of Migration, where Muslims that were all in India went either east or west. And because the Brits had, you know, put in the dividing lines. And the areas with the most population of the Muslims would go to the west side of India, of Greater India, or the east side of Greater India. Now, the west side became known as West Pakistan, and the east was East Pakistan. And that's when I got out there in '62. You could still meet some of the people who had been part of the migration. They were getting old and up in age and whatnot, but you could still meet some of them, and you hear their stories. And the migration was something very horrible. Thousands of people passing one another, killings and starvings and all sorts of nasty things took place during that migration. But anyway, the Americans, after the war, you know, we were sided with Pakistan and dumped barrels of money into that place, your good tax dollars. And we built several cantonments, 5 or 6 of them, and, you know, for the military. One of them was out of Peshawar, which years later Gary Powers flew out of to go to spy on Russia. But anyway, I was assigned a job up north in Pakistan, because our office was in Karachi, which is the south of Pakistan. I was assigned a job up north on one of these cantonments. And I was the only American there, other than an enlisting post, which you never saw these guys. And I dealt with all the Pakistanis there and learned a little Urdu and made my weekly and monthly reports back to the Corps of Engineers. They were stationed in Peshawar. And after that, then I happened to be in Dhaka once. The government, they were getting ready to have a legislation session, and they were going to do it in Dhaka, and which is East Pakistan. And so one of the officials of the government had asked the architect that I was associated with to go to Dhaka to help them out. And so I went with my, you know, architect out there, and we both went out to Dhaka and looked over what they wanted to do. They wanted to build a little building, actually it was under construction, for the legislators who were going to come there for their session. And they needed help, and so they asked these 2 Americans to come out and give them a hand. So while there, Louis Kahn came in town. He had been selected as the architect for what at that time they called the second capital. The first capital was being built in Islamabad. Originally, the capital of Pakistan was Karachi, but Ayub Khan moved it up into his territory and created the Islamabad, which is, I don't know, who's a geography major in here? Anybody? Well, okay. Rawalpindi and Lahore, Peshawar, they're sort of on a line running like that across the northern part of Pakistan in the foothills. And that's where the new capital was going to be located. That's what was under construction. Anyway, back to Dhaka. We were out there, and Lou Khan came to town and was talking with the officials, and the officials asked us to join them in some discussions and showing the professor around. So that's where I met him. And each time that he would come out, I would be told, the professor is coming to Dhaka, can you join us? Now, I had no reason to join them, you know. I had my own job to work with, out of Karachi and out of Rawalpindi. But they would ask me to come and join them. And that's where Lou Khan and I bonded. Because, you know, we would take meals together, have nice drinking bouts together, and just talk architecture. And he encouraged me to come to Philadelphia. And I sort of, you know, didn't know what I wanted to do, because my wife and I, we both wanted to go back to Colorado, even though I didn't have a job. So anyway, my 2-year contract was up, and we came back to the States, and I called Lou and told him, I said, I won't be stopping in Philadelphia because there's a family event going on in Des Moines, which I will must attend, after which I'm going to go on to Denver. So he asked, where would I be staying in Des Moines? And I told him. A couple of days later, this telegram comes to my parents' house in Des Moines, and it said, welcome when ready. So I turned around and came to Philadelphia. That's how I got here. Anybody have any questions for me?
Okay, can I just, first of all, two of Sergeant Wilcots' cousins were part of the original 100 Montford Point Marines.
Right.
And would you like to tell everybody what that is?
Oh, okay. This is the Congressional Gold Medal, which was issued in 2012 after much work by several of the old-timers and Joe Geter, the gunny sergeant, worked their tails off getting Congress to do this. It passed through the House of Representatives, all in favor. Nobody objected to it. It went to the Senate. The Senate was having a hard time with it, and Senator Hagan out of North Carolina stood up and said she would do the job, and it passed through the Senate. So the president signed the bill, and President Obama signed the bill, and the Congress bestowed upon us the Congressional Gold Medal for the Montford Pointers. And there was a big ceremony in Washington at the Capitol, at the Emancipation Hall. We had a big ceremony, and then the next day we went to the Marine Barracks, which is at 8th and I, the oldest established Marine post, and they had the grand parade. And they presented the medal to each one of us. There was about 430 men, and I had never seen so many oxygen tanks in my life at one place. Because these guys are up there. And one of the amazing things about it is that so many of them, were there with their wives or daughters. Because the wife had passed on, and these guys were being cared for by their daughters. And it was something, amazing to see and watch. I met 6 of the fellows that I had gone through the Corps with. Out of these 430 guys, but it was quite a sight.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing, and I'll open it up. Currently, there's 3 streets named after Montford Pointers in the city of Philadelphia. One being Cecil B. Moore Boulevard, which anybody goes to Temple. So their legacy is truly rich. These men really accomplished a lot after the Corps. And Sergeant Wilcots just mentioned 8th and I. As a Marine, I take great pleasure. During the War of 1812, not pleasure in this, but the British burnt Washington, D.C. to the ground. The Capitol, everything. The only 2 buildings they didn't burn was the Marine Corps barracks and our Commandant's house. Now, I think they knew why they didn't want to burn us out, you know what I mean? So with that, anybody have any questions? Like I said, I'm truly humbled by the Montford Pointers, all they went through to serve our country. They're truly great men who made us all better for their sacrifice.
Now, when the Korean War started, and they formed these various battalions, and the black units were being shipped to California and split up into the units that were going to go to Korea for the first time in Marine Corps history, that where blacks and white Marines went into combat together as combat Marines. During World War II, they saw combat as service battalions or the 51st and 52nd Defense Battalion units, that they were anti-aircraft units. And some of the service battalions, that is the men who handled the ammo and carried out the bodies, some of them saw action because they were there. You know, when the stuff hit the fan, every Marine's a rifleman. And they served, though they didn't get credit for it. Very few officers and whatnot ever gave them credit in their histories. You never saw it in the movies, and even in Marine Corps history, they didn't talk about it. You have to dig deep. You have to go to the division, historical division, to really get the information. That's the way the country was, you know.
Any questions?
Give a little background. You mentioned Louis Kahn, and probably I'm old enough to know
How famous he is.
pretty well, but
Amazing.
you might tell us a little bit about his background and how famous he was, and you can bring up the East and West Pakistan and Bangladesh and your involvement in the what was it, the Congressional Building in
the Parliament Building, yeah.
Yeah.
Luke Kahn's of Philadelphia. He came here, I think, from Estonia when he was 5 years old, and grew up in Philadelphia. He went to Central High, graduated out of Central High, and then University of Pennsylvania, where he studied architecture. What can I say about him? He was a very hard worker, and he has very little work out there because he spent a lot of time in academia and developing his philosophy. There's a wonderful book out now that's called You Say to Brick. It's written by Wendy Lesser, and it came out last year.
It's called what? I didn't.
You Say to Brick. It's a biography of Louis Kahn, and that is a wonderful book. I've seen many books written for or about Lou Kahn, and this is the only one that I really liked. I'd advise the library here, where's the librarian, to have it on the shelf.
Go ahead.
So, thank you for your service. Oh, thank you for
yeah.
your service, by the way. Was there a thing more? I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, he wanted me to go further about Pakistan. There's not much I can say about the East and West until in 1971. I can say something. 1970, they had an election out there, and a East Pakistani or Bengali, Sheikh Mujibur, won a seat, the seat in the parliament. And the members of West Pakistan didn't like it. They didn't care for him. He was a rebel rouser. And they put him in jail. They released him and sent him back to Dhaka. And the people rallied around him, and war was declared. 1971 was a war of liberation in the early part of it, 1971, and that's when it became the People's Republic of Bangladesh. They broke off ties with Pakistan altogether. They're different people, really. They're Bengalis, and they're, you know, that part of the world has been in the paper recently because of I still call it Burma. Myanmar, you know, have kicked out a bunch of these Muslims out of Burma, and so that's what you're reading about now. And they're swarming into Dhaka, into Bangladesh rather, and Bangladesh already has its own problems with its population and its poverty. But they're what can I say other than wonderful people that I met with. But after it became the People's Republic of Bangladesh, they engaged Khan back and said, you know, we must finish this work. It is now our capital. It is no longer the second capital of Pakistan. It becomes the capital of Bangladesh. New contracts were signed. We went back out there and continued the work. During this war of liberation, while all this turmoil was going on, Lou kept working. He kept designing. And we asked him that question, you know, look, you know, they've got a war over there. We don't know what's going on. Why are you working? And he says, they haven't told me to stop. That's the way he was, you know. Before the war, I was out there. I would go back and forth. That was my job. And I would go out there 2-3 times a year to look over the supervision, look over the contract, look over the construction, talk to the people, see what's happening. And so they knew me. And I was entrusted with that job, you know, as for it to be called in the profession the project architect.
I'm sorry.
Hi.
Yeah.
So at the end of your talk, you kind of referenced, and you said that's the way it was, referencing, I suppose, race relations at that time. You were a professional soldier and you were a professional architect for a long time in either of those. Did you notice any difference between the two? Was there one experience that was better than the other in regards to acceptance when it came to being a black man in the country at that time?
No different.
Were they both positive experiences? Like
Well,
overwhelmingly positive, or were they, you saw?
I saw both sides of it. But I personally never bothered with it. And it never got under my skin because I just kept moving. You know, I grew up, our family was such that you were your own person. My family, you know, there was like 14 of us. Yeah. We were all individuals. We all went separate ways. Even though, you know, Mom and Dad a couple of times will say, why don't you get together with... But we grew up where the house was a book. Dad had a 3-volume set of H.G. Wells, you know, and I couldn't figure out why he had that thing. But that's what he had by his bedside. And he prepared a message for all Marines. And this message is read to all units on the November the 10th, no matter what's going on in the rest of the world. And so I was in Korea in 1951, and November the 10th comes up, And I am called down from the hill, and they asked me to bring a squad with you. And I gather some guys, and we go down to see what's going on. And there's the cake, and the photographers are standing there. And one of the lieutenants, he reads the message from John Lejeune, and about the Corps, and how we are, what we are, and what we'll do. And then what's happening after that is by tradition, and no one knows how this tradition started, but the oldest member at the ceremony and the youngest member at the ceremony do the cake cutting. And the deal is that the oldest member will cut the cake, and he will hand a slice of the cake to the youngest. That's the way it goes. Sometimes if in these high mucky muck places, of course, you don't get the oldest, you get some dignitary, who's out front. But anyway, 1951, November the 10th, I'm called down to cut the cake. And so there's a photograph I brought with me, and it shows me with the bayoneted rifle cutting the cake, because we didn't have a cake knife, of course. But that's an official Marine Corps photograph. And some people believe that it's the first time that white and black Marines celebrating the birthday together. We happen to be in combat.
Wow. And as a Marine, we're taught that the oldest Marine passes it to the youngest Marine to pass along our tradition and legacy. So I just love, no matter if you're in combat, you're in the front line of combat, come on back and cut a cake.
Yeah. And they also, every weapon fired around out there, from small arm to the big guns. They took 2 minutes or 1 minute or whatever it was to fire around. It's crazy.
And I just want to add, for anybody that don't know, the Marine Corps was born November 10th, 1775 in Philadelphia, PA, at a place called Tun Tavern.
Yeah.
So we were basically born in a bar. And I think that has a lot to do with our legacy.
Yeah,
I actually had a question, two of them. What are your two most memorable things? That is, one from the military and the other one from architecture. And accomplishments maybe that you'd like to tell us about.
Accomplishments. When I was shipped out to Korea, I was a PFC. While there, I became a squad leader as a PFC, and they promoted me to corporal because they called me down and they said, "Why are you a PFC? You've got the time in. We think you should be corporal. Why not? What did you do wrong?" And I told them something that they had never heard before. They had never heard of Montford Point. And we sat there at the CP, and I told them about Montford Point. And when you go into the Corps, you get a bucket. They hand you this bucket, and they just throw stuff in. Toothpaste, cigarettes, whatever, razor blades, the whole kit and caboodle goes in there. Scrub brush, soap, and they'll tell you if it's not in the bucket, you don't need it. So don't ask for it. And I told these guys that, and they sat there with their mouths agape. You know, these are officers, and they said, "Well, you're a corporal. You know, return to the hill." So I go back to the hill, and I'm a corporal now. Guys are laughing about it, and then the platoon sergeant, he gets wounded, and he was also a member who had been at the Chosin Reservoir. And at that time, they were beginning to weed some of the Chosin Reservoir guys out to send them back to the States. And so he handed me the platoon. The platoon is 35 to 40 men, plus you might get a machine gun section with you, which I had. And so I'm the corporal with the platoon. And the platoon leader, an officer usually, they were shifting at the time, so there was a period where he hadn't come on board yet. He's actually in that photograph. But anyway, then I hand him the platoon, and he and I ran those hills together, and we get together every now and then. After 60-some odd years, last December, we had lunch together in media. He's actually from Virginia, but he has family up here near Chadds Ford someplace. And so whenever he's in the area, he'll call and we'll get together. And so in December we did with my son David, and two of his sons were there, and his wife. It's just, just two old guys hugging, that's all. Now, your question was...
Also with architecture, what was your favorite memorable project with architecture?
There's several of them.
Okay.
One just being in architecture. And meeting Con, I didn't know who he was at the time we met. And then working with him was it was up and down. It was a joy and a chore. One of the grand moments was after he passed away. I was still, involved with DACA work. And when we completed the DACA works, it was in 1983, but in 1989, the Aga Khan Award for Architecture, he was nominated, in his buildings for DACA, was nominated for an award. Now, the Aga Khan, I don't know, anybody know about the Aga Khan?
Well, we know about the other.
The Aga Khan's a pretty good guy, he's pretty cool. But, the whole family. But he had created this award program, along with other programs that he funds, or his family funds. Anyway, I was invited to go to Cairo, where the award was going to be presented. And it was presented for the late Louis I. Khan, the architect of the Capitol Complex of Bangladesh. And I represented the late architect. That was quite an event. In Cairo, it was taking place at the old Citadel in Cairo, which is sort of up on a hill, on a mound. And you get there by an old sort of a dusty roadway. And to see this, and to see all these people from various parts of the world who were there to celebrate and some to receive awards and whatnot, from every continent. And here's this guy out of Philadelphia, you know, this kid from Iowa, marching along with them. And the parapets are lined with trumpeters, and they're blaring away the March of Aida, you know, and it was really something.
Thank you.
I just want to add something about history. Sergeant Wilcots mentions Chosen. That was known as the frozen chosen. I think over 80% of Marines suffered frostbite alone. Many that would normally have bled out didn't, because the temperature was so low, your body temperature dropped. But the most decorated Marine of all time is Chesty Puller. That's why our bulldog's named Chesty. And he had one of his famous statements when the Chinese came over the hills. Heavily outnumbered were the Marines, and he said, "We have them right where we want them. We can kill them in any direction." Yeah. So that came out of the frozen chosen.
The commander of the 7th Marine, Colonel Homer Litzenberg, when he formed the 7th and called the regiment together to give us the mission, what the Marines were going to do. And he ended up by saying, "By the way, I have Purple Hearts for each of you."
Hey, Sarge. Hey, thanks for your service. I think the question in my mind that sticks out is about the racism that you dealt with through the Marine Corps in your early years there. And I think just from the audience standpoint, how did you work through that? How did you pass through it, whether you saw amongst soldiers next to you, through your years into work? I mean, how did you deal with those obstacles personally and be able to keep marching on?
Well, the early days, of course, being in Montford Point, we were all black. So, there was no issue. I chose not to go into Jacksonville because there would be an issue. You could actually get hurt. They didn't, there was a railroad track running down the middle of the city, and, the blacks were on one side, whites on the other. And you just did not cross over. So I myself personally, I said, look, I'll just stay on the base. I'll go to the movie 3 or 4 times, see the same thing, rather than go into Jacksonville. Until we moved out and went to New Jersey, then things to me were normal. Having come from Des Moines, New Jersey was a snap.
When you returned, you talked about how the Marine Corps changed. You became in charge of I think you did 5 or 6 soldiers, white soldiers. In that command structure, did you run into problems just because of the color of your skin with those white soldiers? No,
I didn't. And like I said, I commanded the platoon, and they were all white. I don't know in the company if there was another black. There might have been. The first black officer to command a combat platoon, combat company, was Lieutenant Jenkins. And I had met him. We actually went on the same boat over together and came back together. But he being an officer and me being a peon, we didn't mix. But and in the profession, I never ran into anything personally. I know it happened. I know there was, a client or two or somebody might question it. Or as you would walk into the door, they would do this to see who's behind you, who's in charge, and you have to say you're in charge. You see things like that, Even in Pakistan it happened to me. I mean, I went in to see this brigadier because I wanted to live on the base rather than go back and forth to the hotel every night. And so I said, I just live here on the base. So I had to go see this brigadier. And he kept doing this, you know, stretching his neck when I walked in the door. And I said, I'm it. You know, broke the ice, and we got along fine. He gave me quarters. Yeah.
I just got the sign that we're running out of time. So I just want to thank you, and I hope you really appreciate Sergeant Wilcots being here tonight. He's a personal hero of mine.
I said, you know, people will, you know, thank you for your service and whatnot. Actually, it was a privilege to serve. And I like it. And to wrap up this gentleman's question about what I thought about different things and whatnot. And on my notes here, I have one little note, if I can find it anyway. It said that when I'm asked about Korea, the thing that sticks in my mind is that getting up in the morning and those hills are shrouded with clouds and passing through some of those valleys in the springtime, and you see shoots of green poking through the spring snow and the icy cold brooks. And you look at that, and I would say, we're trespassing. I know it's a war, but I wouldn't give this up for anything, you know, if I were here. And that's the part I remember about Korea. I don't remember that other stuff, other than when the Olympics come along and I saw those hills. Yeah. But thank you for listening.